Search for Sweden on Google and see what comes up. Most likely, snow glistening in the weak sun, quiet streets, crystal clear lakes, polite and happy people. A social paradise where everything works, everything is clean, everything is fair. For decades, Sweden has been sold as the perfect model. Exemplary education, first-rate public health care, gender equality, total security. The social welfare manual that the whole world wants to copy. But that's only part of the story. Because behind this Scandinavian facade of prosperity and organization, there is a Sweden that almost no one sees, and that many people prefer to ignore. A Sweden where gangs fight over territory with bombs and machine guns, where teenagers are recruited as hitmen, where the healthcare system is collapsing, and where inequality is growing silently, neighborhood by neighborhood. While tourists take pictures in Stockholm and praise the quality of life, entire communities live under an informal curfew, facing daily shootings, explosions in the middle of the night, and a state that, in some regions, has simply lost control. Today, Bello Mundo takes you inside this invisible reality, the real Sweden. Complex, fractured, and yes, dangerous. Number 1. Location and general information. Sweden is located in the far north of Europe, a frozen piece of land that, even though far from the world's major centers, has managed to become a global benchmark for quality of life, innovation, and social justice. It is the largest country in Scandinavia. It borders Norway and Finland and is connected to Denmark by a bridge that looks like something out of a science fiction movie. Across the Baltic Sea are Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and the ever-present shadow of Russia. Stockholm, the capital, is one of the most technologically advanced cities in the world. Malmö and Gothenburg complete the trio of major Swedish cities. They are modern urban centers with punctual trains, bike lanes that work, clean air, and cafes that look like they came straight out of Pinterest. On paper, everything is perfect: high HDI, low infant mortality, high life expectancy, one of the lowest corruption rates in the world, a state that invests heavily in education, health, and well-being. The Scandinavian dream. But just step outside the city center. Just move away from the brightly lit shop windows, glass facades, and well-maintained bike lanes, and Sweden begins to show its cracks. This is where the promise of the perfect country begins to crumble. And to understand how this story went off the rails, we need to look at a phenomenon that grew alongside Swedish national pride, a phenomenon that gradually turned into a crisis. Number 2. The model country that became a war zone. For a long time, it was the perfect example of the third way. Neither savage capitalism nor radical socialism, a balanced, functional welfare state, admired even by the richest countries. With just over 10 million inhabitants spread across a territory almost the size of Spain, the Swedes built their reputation on 3 pillars: equality, security, and quality of life. And the most curious thing? It worked. Low crime, free education, universal health care, total trust in institutions, the Scandinavian dream in its purest form. But something changed. Today, the country that seemed crisis-proof has one of the highest rates of gang-related homicides in Europe. A place that used to record a few dozen violent deaths a year now counts hundreds, and worse, with explosives. In 2024, more than 62,000 people are directly or indirectly linked to criminal networks. A frightening number for a small, supposedly peaceful and ultra-organized population. And the most surreal statistic of all, the number of explosions related to gang disputes jumped from 149 in 2023 to 317 in 2024. Explosions. We are not talking about fireworks, but homemade bombs, detonated at the doors of houses, in cars, in residential buildings, as if the country had become the scene of urban warfare. Stockholm, Uppsala, Malmö, Gothenburg. All major cities have already recorded attacks of this type, in broad daylight, in the middle of neighborhoods. In 2023, 42 people died in 290 shootings recorded in the country. It may seem small compared to Latin American countries, for example, but for a Nordic country, these numbers represent a social catastrophe. Swedish authorities admit that the escalation of violence is related to a war between rival criminal factions that are coordinated from abroad. These are no longer small local groups fighting over street corners. They are organized international networks with clear hierarchies and heavy weaponry. And what is most worrying is that this violence is not restricted to criminals. Ordinary citizens are hit by stray bullets. Entire families live under an informal curfew, and entire neighborhoods have become territories controlled by crime. The situation has reached such a point that Sweden is now considering sending prisoners to prisons in other countries. The prison system is overcrowded because of the wave of gang-related crimes. In some areas of Malmö, the country's third largest city, residents report that they only leave their homes during the day and avoid certain streets altogether. It is the end of Sweden as a model of public safety. The country that was once a global benchmark for social peace now makes headlines with scenes of terror that were once only seen in conflict zones. And all of this has one thing in common: youth. Because those at the center of this new war are not soldiers, they are boys. And that is where the next chapter of this crisis begins. Number 3. Child soldiers of crime. They are 15, 14, sometimes 12 years old. They carry backpacks, wear baseball caps, and listen to music on their cell phones. They could be going to school. But in many neighborhoods in Sweden, these boys are going to war. And that's no exaggeration. Today, Swedish teenagers are being recruited by criminal factions for tasks that were once the domain of adults. Drug dealing, intimidation, execution. The gangs have discovered a cruel shortcut. Minors get lighter sentences. They are harder to track down, and they will take on any mission for a little money and a little respect. In recent years, Swedish police have identified an alarming increase in the participation of young people in serious crimes. In 2024, dozens of gang-related murders were committed by teenagers, some with automatic weapons, others with explosives. These kids are called death delivery boys. And it's not a metaphor. They are paid to leave packages at rivals' doors, plant devices in cars, pull triggers in the middle of the street. And then they go home as if nothing had happened. In many neighborhoods in Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmö, this reality is already part of everyday life. Teachers report students who disappear for days. Residents describe children wandering around with lost looks on their faces and cell phones that never stop vibrating. In some areas, gangs have more power of persuasion than the state itself. And most alarmingly, the average age of recruits continues to fall. 12-year-olds are already appearing as soldiers of crime. Some are recruited at the school gates. Others are recruited at home by brothers or cousins who are already involved in crime. It is the complete trivialization of violence. Sweden, once a symbol of child protection, now sees its youth used as the front line in a war that no one knows how it will end. And what fuels all this? It's not just crime. It's also inequality. Number 4. Inequality. On the outside, Sweden still shows off its postcard images. Clean parks, modern architecture, minimalist cafes. But on the inside, the country is divided. It's not an official division. It's more subtle. more silent, but it's real. Today there is a Sweden that works, and another that has been left behind. On one side, the central neighborhoods, well kept, well served, well protected, good schools, efficient healthcare, peace and quiet. On the other, the so-called vulnerable areas, isolated regions with a majority of immigrants, poor infrastructure, and almost no state presence. According to official reports, more than 50 areas of the country have already been classified as critical. In some, poverty is 4 times higher than the national average. In others, youth unemployment reaches 70%. These places have become modern ghettos, like Rinkeby in Stockholm or Rosengård in Malmö. There, the state fails in almost everything: education, security, healthcare, employment. And even those who were born in Sweden but have a foreign surname feel the weight of prejudice. Resumes ignored, segregated schools, selective policing. It is the emergence of a new social class: second-class Swedes. People who live in the country but do not fully belong to it. Meanwhile, national averages remain high. The HDI is impressive, per capita income is convincing, but these statistics hide a gap that grows every year. Swedish inequality is no longer an isolated stain. It is a system, and like any unequal system, it comes at a high price in lives, opportunities, and trust. And the impact of this is clearly evident in what has always been the country's greatest pride: public services. Number 5. The collapse of public services. For a long time, the so-called welfare state was at the heart of Swedish identity, a model of government where everyone has access to healthcare, education, transportation, and security, financed by high taxes and active citizenship. In theory, it still exists. In practice, it is collapsing. In healthcare, the red light has been flashing for a long time. In 2024, Sweden experienced the largest strike in the sector in decades, more than 70 days of work stoppages. There is a shortage of doctors. There is a shortage of nurses. There is an excess of overtime, double shifts, and burnout. In just 1 year, healthcare professionals accumulated more than 3 million hours of overtime. Specialist appointments take months. Non-urgent surgeries are postponed indefinitely. Ambulances are delayed. Clinics close early, especially in poor neighborhoods. The universal healthcare system, once a global benchmark, now operates at 2 speeds. Those who can afford it pay for private care. Those who can't wait. And the problem doesn't stop there. An aging population, coupled with demographic growth in vulnerable regions, puts even more pressure on the system. And when demand grows and the structure cannot keep up, the result is obvious: collapse. In transportation, there are failures in lines that stop operating at night in certain regions. In social assistance centers, there are long lines and a lack of staff. In basic services, standards have fallen. Trust in the presence of the state has always been the secret of Sweden's success. But that presence is disappearing precisely where it is most needed. And among those hardest hit by this collapse are children. Inside schools, the future is also beginning to fail. Number 6. Education in decline. Education was the strongest pillar of the Swedish project: free, high-quality public education for all, a system that produced not only good students, but good citizens. But this reality is crumbling. In PISA tests, the leading international indicator of student performance, Sweden has been falling year after year. In math, science, and reading, the country no longer ranks among the best. And what's worse, inequality between schools is increasing. In central neighborhoods, schools continue to function. But in vulnerable neighborhoods, the situation is different. Overworked teachers, crowded classrooms, students with severe learning disabilities. Many do not even speak Swedish fluently. By 2035, Sweden will need to hire more than 150,000 new teachers. But with low salaries, poor working conditions, and increasing school violence, the profession has lost its prestige. Schools, which used to be places of safety and inclusion, have become a reflection of the inequality outside their walls. The poorest families, many of them immigrants, are unable to keep up with their children's education. Not because they don't want to, but because they lack the necessary structure. They lack time, language skills, and support. The result is an entire generation growing up without prospects. And where there are no schools, there is room for something else: crime. And we've already seen where that leads, haven't we? Number 7. The immigration crisis. Remember we mentioned second-class Swedes earlier? People who live in the country but don't fully belong there. This also applies to those who were born in Sweden but are not the children of Swedes, but rather of immigrants who came seeking peace, refuge, and a better life. For a long time, Sweden was a model of hospitality. It welcomed war refugees, persecuted families, and immigrants from all corners of the world. Open doors, humanitarian rhetoric, integration as a national priority. But the reality was much harsher than the rhetoric. Between 2015 and 2016, Sweden recorded the highest number of asylum applications in the European Union, proportionally speaking, a huge volume, and in a short time, entire cities had to adapt. Not all of them succeeded. Today, more than 20% of the Swedish population was born outside the country. In some regions, that number exceeds 80%. And the problem is not the number. It is what has been, or has not been, done about it. Integration has failed. There has been a lack of consistent public policies. There has been a lack of real investment. And above all, there has been a lack of political will. Immigrants have been pushed into segregated neighborhoods, bad schools, few opportunities, almost no contact with the native population. The result was the formation of bubbles, parallel societies, people living in the same territory but in completely different worlds. And where there is no connection, mistrust grows. In recent years, the debate on immigration has become campaign fuel. Far-right parties have grown, the government has tightened rules, and the immigrant population has been blamed for everything: violence, unemployment, the collapse of services. But the equation is more complex. Most immigrants are not involved in crime. They are trying to work, study, and raise their children in peace. But when the state fails, exclusion turns into revolt. The lack of opportunities becomes fertile ground for drug trafficking, and the absence of serious policies becomes negative headlines. Today, many foreigners live in fear, not of the war they left behind, but of the prejudice they have encountered here. Sweden, once a symbol of solidarity, is now trying to put out fires that it helped start. And the impact of all this goes beyond neighborhoods. It goes beyond statistics. It goes straight to the heart of Swedish identity. Number 8. The fall of the Scandinavian myth. For decades, Sweden was more than a country. It was an idea, the modern utopia, the perfect balance between progress and humanity. A place where capitalism seemed to have a heart and socialism, efficiency, stable governments, free education, exemplary public health, real equality, enviable security. The whole world looked at Sweden as if it were a mirror of what it wanted to be. But mirrors also crack. Today, Sweden's image has changed, and it wasn't because of a war, a coup, or a financial crisis. It happened gradually. A silent collapse, internal, and for that very reason, more difficult to face. Violence continues to rise. Young people are being recruited into crime. Public services are failing. Inequality is no longer the exception. It is the norm. The integration of immigrants has been abandoned, and politics has become a minefield between extremes. While tourists still visit Stockholm thinking they are stepping into a Nordic paradise, residents of neighborhoods like Rinkeby or Rosengård live with fear, abandonment, and nighttime explosions. Sweden remains an incredible country in many ways, but the myth is in free fall. And perhaps that is the most uncomfortable point of all. It's not that the country has gotten worse. It's that now the world is seeing what it has always preferred to hide. Because behind every perfect country, there is an imperfect reality. And Sweden, like anywhere else in the world, has not escaped this. The question that remains is not just about Sweden. It's about what happens when a country believes too much in its own reputation and forgets to maintain it. Because while the world applauded the Swedish model, a lot was already breaking down inside. And perhaps the greatest danger of all is not experiencing a collapse. It's not realizing that it has already begun. If this video made you rethink everything you thought you knew about Sweden, imagine what lies behind other perfect countries. Like, share, and comment below what else you want to see behind the facade. And remember, the real world is very different from what you see on postcards. Thank you very much for joining us. See you next time.